You ever think about, like, when we hear about these brilliant people, these amazing thinkers and stuff,
Mm.
but we don't really think about, like, where they came from. Like, how did their childhoods maybe shape who they became?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we're going to kind of look at that today. We're going to dive deep into the childhood of a guy named Ibn Sina. You might know him as Avicenna in the West, but we're going to call him Ibn Sina today. And super fascinating guy. His work, still ripples through our world today, even though he lived, centuries
Mhm.
ago. So to kind of guide us on this journey, we've got this podcast episode. It's called Peace of Mind 24, The Childhood of Ibn Sina, the boy who became a genius. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, pretty interesting stuff. And, we're not just talking about some brilliant kid here. We're talking about how his childhood, like, really set the stage for, like, an intellectual revolution.
Yeah, and it's tempting to think, these geniuses are just born that way. But Ibn Sina's story, like, kind of shows us that it's a little more complicated than that. He was born in 980 AD near Bukhara. And his father wasn't just a scholar, he was also the governor. So you can imagine the kind of intellectual atmosphere, like, in that house.
Okay, so dinner table debates with a governor scholar dad. That's not your average childhood. I mean,
Yeah.
but it makes you wonder, how much did that environment actually shape
Right.
Ibn Sina's, like, future brilliance? I mean,
Yeah.
we all know how much our own families and, like, early experiences influence what we're interested in, right?
Absolutely. And for Ibn Sina, this upbringing like totally immersed him in a world where knowledge was like the most important thing. Like by age 10, he had memorized the entire Quran. And that's not just like a feat of memory, it also tells us a lot about how education worked back then. Rote learning was really important. It was like building a foundation for the kind of analytical thinking he would do later.
Wow, that is some serious mental discipline. But he didn't just stop at scripture.
Hmm.
I mean, by 16, Ibn Sina was already diving headfirst into medicine, and not just reading about it like he was treating patients. He was developing his own theories at 16.
Wow.
I know I was barely mastering the art of procrastination at that age. So what drove him to go so far beyond, like, what everyone else was studying at that time?
Well, it really shows how proactive he was. He wasn't just content with like passively absorbing knowledge. He was driven to actually use it. He wanted to push the boundaries of what was known. And it's this active engagement, this real thirst for like practical application. That's what really sets apart a mind like Ibn Sina's.
Mm. Yeah, that makes me think about, like, all these young innovators today. The ones who are, like, coding apps or starting businesses before they can even vote. It's like they have this innate drive to do something with what they learn.
Mm.
But even for, like, a prodigy like Ibn Sina, there are challenges. Like, he hit this major roadblock at 18. He was wrestling with Aristotle's metaphysics. We're talking 40 readings before he had a breakthrough.
Yeah, and we have to remember that back then, understanding Aristotle wasn't just some academic exercise. It was like the foundation of scientific and philosophical thought. Like if you could grasp this work, it was like unlocking a whole new level of intellectual engagement.
So not your average textbook struggle. This was like scaling Mount Everest, but, like, intellectually.
Yeah.
But then he has this turning point. Like, just as he's about to give up, he stumbles upon this commentary by Al-Farabi, and boom, everything just clicks into place.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, like, when you finally understand something complex after, like, hours of just, like, head scratching.
Totally.
And then you have that aha feeling,
Yeah.
and it makes all the frustration worth it.
Exactly. And for Ibn Sina, this was way more than just understanding some difficult text. It was about finding the right lens to view the world through, a lens that would shape his whole approach to knowledge from then on.
It's like finding the right mentor, right? The right guide who can, like, unlock a new way of seeing things.
Hmm.
But Ibn Sina's story, it's not like a straight line from struggle to mastery.
Yeah.
This is where things get even more interesting.
Oh, yeah. This encounter with Aristotle and then the breakthrough he had, it seems like it really ignited something in Ibn Sina. He didn't just conquer philosophy and medicine. He went on to explore, like, logic, astronomy, even music. It wasn't just about accumulating knowledge. It was about weaving it all together.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just a polymath here. This is about someone who saw connections between fields that most people thought were totally separate. But how did he actually use this interdisciplinary approach? That's what I'm really curious about.
That's the key question, and it's one we'll definitely unpack as we go further into his story. Because Ibn Sina's childhood wasn't just about like exceptional talent. It was about developing this totally unique way of thinking, a way of connecting the dots that would transform his world and leave a legacy for centuries to come.
So we left off with Ibn Sina, like, really on the verge of something amazing. That his mind is just buzzing with all these connections between these fields that seem totally different. And it makes you wonder, was this just like a product of his time? Or was he really onto something bigger, something we can still learn from today?
It really is fascinating, you know. Today, we're all about specializing in one thing, right? But back then, they celebrated the polymath. But he wasn't just collecting knowledge like in these separate little boxes. He was actively trying to find where those boxes like overflowed into each other, you know?
So it's not just like he was a jack of all trades. He was a master at weaving them all together into something totally new. Can you give me an example, though? Like,
Yeah.
where did he actually apply this interdisciplinary thinking?
We'll take his work in medicine, for example. He wasn't just happy with treating the symptoms. He wanted to understand the root causes, you know? Like, what were the philosophical principles behind health and disease? His famous book, The Canon of Medicine. It wasn't just a medical textbook. It actually brought in philosophical concepts. It made connections between the physical and the metaphysical.
That's so different from how we think about medicine today. Like, we're hyper-focused on these tiny little specialties. It's like he was seeing the whole patient, the whole system, not just the individual parts.
That's exactly it. And this holistic view, it wasn't limited to medicine. He saw music as a reflection of mathematical harmonies, poetry as like a language to express philosophical truth. It's like he was mapping out how all knowledge is connected.
Okay, so he's making these incredible connections across these different fields, but was it all just theory? Or did this actually lead to any, like, groundbreaking discoveries or advancements?
His interdisciplinary approach was really key to his innovations. For example, his understanding of astronomy actually informed his medical theories. He believed that events in the stars could influence our health. I mean, that might sound a little out there today, but back then it really pushed the boundaries of science.
I see what you mean. It's not just about the specific theories themselves, it's about his willingness to cross those traditional lines between disciplines. That's pretty bold for any scholar, let alone someone who lived centuries ago.
Oh, absolutely. It's this boldness, you know, this refusal to be confined by conventional thinking that makes his story so relevant today. We're always told to stay in our lane. But Ibn Sina reminds us that the most exciting discoveries often happen at the intersections.
Think about all the problems we're facing today. Climate change, social inequality, technology changing so fast. None of these can be solved if we just stay in the neat little boxes of traditional disciplines. Don't we need more people like Ibn Sina in the world right now? More people willing to connect the dots?
I couldn't agree more. His legacy isn't just about his accomplishments, it's about the way he approached knowledge itself. It's a challenge to us to approach our own learning with that same curiosity and desire to integrate things.
So if we want to learn something from Ibn Sina's childhood, it's not just about memorizing a bunch of information. It's about this constant pursuit of connections. But how do we actually do that? How do we cultivate that kind of thinking in ourselves and in future generations? I mean, it's one thing to admire it from afar, but how do we actually live it?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? And, you know, there's a part of Ibn Sina's story I think we haven't really touched on yet that might give us some clues. It's about his struggle with Aristotle, you
Right.
know, that moment where he hit a wall and almost gave up.
You mean even a genius like Ibn Sina had moments of doubt and frustration? I guess that makes him a little more relatable.
Yeah.
But how does that connect to this whole interdisciplinary thing?
Well, think about it. He's wrestling with one of the most difficult philosophical texts of his time. He could have easily just given up, said it was too hard or not relevant to his medical studies.
But he didn't. He kept searching. He sought out different perspectives, different commentaries, until something finally clicked. It was like he was actively looking for those connections, even when they weren't obvious.
Exactly. It's like his whole approach to knowledge was built on this belief that the connections were there, even if he couldn't see them right away. And that persistence, that willingness to struggle, is just as important as the curiosity itself.
That's a great point. It's not enough to just be curious. You have to have the grit to stick with it when things get tough, to trust that those connections are out there waiting to be discovered.
And that brings us back to you, the listener. If Ibn Sina, growing up centuries ago, could embrace this kind of intellectual journey, imagine what you can do with all the resources we have today. The internet alone is like this massive playground for making connections.
It's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, like Ibn Sina. But we have tools he couldn't even dream of. So what are we going to do with this opportunity?
That's a question we'll keep exploring as we delve deeper into Ibn Sina's life and legacy. Because his story isn't just some historical curiosity, it's a call to action for all of us.
Okay, so we've been tracing this incredible journey of Ibn Sina. You know, from his upbringing to his ability to connect all these different fields. It's like he had this internal compass always pointing him to the connections between things like astronomy and medicine and philosophy and music. But I feel like there's still a piece missing, something we haven't really talked about yet. that might help us understand how he developed this way of thinking.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've talked about his father's influence, the intellectual environment of his home, but there's something else going on here. Remember how Ibn Sina struggled with Aristotle's metaphysics for so long? It wasn't just about the difficulty of the text itself.
You mean, it was about how he approached that struggle.
Mhm.
Most people would have given up way before 40 readings, but he just kept going, kept searching for that aha moment.
Exactly. And I think that persistence, that refusal to give up, that was something his father instilled in him. We often talk about how much access to knowledge Ibn Sina had, but it's really the attitude towards learning that makes all the difference. His father modeled a way of engaging with these really difficult ideas, of wrestling with them until they gave up their secrets.
So it wasn't just about having a library full of books, it was about having someone to guide him through it. Someone who showed him how to approach these challenging texts with patience and a desire to learn. It makes you think about the role of mentors in our own lives.
It's so important. Think about it. Ibn Sina's father didn't just give him all the answers. He gave him the tools and the mindset to find the answers himself. And that's what true mentorship is all about.
And it's not limited to academics either. It's about encouraging a love of learning, a curiosity that goes beyond the classroom. It's about showing young minds that it's okay to struggle to make mistakes. As long as you keep searching, keep asking questions.
Couldn't agree more. And honestly, I think that's the most important lesson we can take away from Ibn Sina's childhood, even more than his specific achievements. It's recognizing that genius isn't some innate quality you're born with. It's a way of looking at the world, a commitment to lifelong learning and exploration.
So if we want to raise the next generation of Ibn Sinas, it's not about force-feeding them facts or pushing them to specialize in one tiny area. It's about cultivating that same curiosity, that same desire to connect the dots, that same willingness to embrace the unknown.
And it's about remembering that this journey doesn't stop when you become an adult. Ibn Sina's story reminds us that we can all develop this way of thinking no matter how old we are or where we come from.
It's like he's saying, hey, if I could do it back in the 10th century, imagine what you can do with all the resources you have today. It's pretty inspiring.
It really is. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the childhood of Ibn Sina, I hope you're not just amazed by what he achieved, but that you're also feeling a renewed sense of curiosity about your own potential.
Because maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of Ibn Sina in all of us,
Yeah.
just waiting to be awakened. So
Yeah.
go out there, explore those connections, ask those questions, and never stop learning.
Yeah.
You never know what amazing discoveries are out there waiting for you.
Until next time, keep diving deep.